Okay, looks like we're good.
Okay. All right. I want to welcome everyone here. It is Thursday, July 2nd, and we're having a virtual board meeting. We will go ahead and begin with roll call. And Larry, we'll start with you.
You got to unmute, Larry.
Or use your thumb.
There we go. Okay, Larry Jepson, board member. Sorry about that.
Randall Bagley, board member.
Steve Norton, superintendent.
Roger, you have to unmute too.
I thought I did. Okay. Roger Polster, board member.
Kathy Christiansen, board member.
Chris Corcoran, board member.
Terry Rhodes, board member.
And Dale Hanson, business administrator.
And Jeff Nelson, board member, is excused. We'll go ahead and begin with Terry leading us in our pledge and mission statement.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our mission is to educate students for success in a changing world.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, any public input, Steve?
No.
Okay, and we don't have anything on our consent agenda, so we'll just move to the action agenda. And Dale, do you want to say anything about it before we approve it?
Okay, yeah, just to review quickly what it is. So this resolution is regarding phase 3 of the Johnson Controls. It's an energy, what do they call it? Can't make the term anyway. It's kind of an energy retrofit system, but it's installing solar systems at both Lewiston Elementary and Summit Elementary. As a board, we already approved the project itself, but as far as entering into the financing, there's a requirement here of this resolution being approved by the board for us to legally go ahead. And so the resolution itself is very simple. Basically just stating that as a board, we wanted to go into debt to purchase this solar system, that it's beneficial to the district, and that we'll be entering into a financial transaction, which would be a lease purchase agreement through Sterling National Bank. It basically gives Kathy, as our board president, and me the authorization to sign in behalf of the school board as we enter into the contracts with them. And then later on, it also gives authorization for the signers, which I would be, to be able to make payments and do withdrawals as we pay the construction claims as they come in throughout the process. And that's basically it. So it's just basically putting the structure there as to who has authorization to do what, and that the board approves that. It also shows up there in section 4. It does limit it. It says that the maximum principal amount of the agreement or other tax exempt obligations expected to be delivered for the equipment is not expected to exceed $1,298,070. And then I also attached to the board docs there a copy of the payment schedule that shows those payments stretching over a 20-year period. Each will be due on the 14th of March in each given year. just to give you an idea, I know at Lewiston Elementary, the energy savings, I guess, worth using the solar energy there was supposed to basically run the full operation of the school as to what their needs are. Summit Elementary, it doesn't do that because we're not putting solar panels off over the entire building, but just the newer section of it. But I was curious, just looking to see what we had spent in previous years for energy compared to what we are paying for the cost. So what they anticipate is incurred savings. And again, these are guaranteed by Johnson Controls. But so I looked at last year in the 2019 fiscal year, and we had spent like $48,000 at Lewiston and $45,000 at Summit just for electricity billings there. And so it's $95,000 in energy usage a year ago. And so they are anticipating that we'll actually incur $70,000 of savings this first year. And then that'll continue to increase each year. But so that kind of gives you an idea of what's anticipated, the savings that should be realized there. And this will be interesting to watch this. But again, like I say, those savings are guaranteed by Johnson Controls. So if they come up short, Johnson will write us a check for the difference. And so anyway, the request really is for the school board to approve the authorization and have us move forward. We are scheduled for July 14th to have the closing on the transaction with Sterling National. And so this had to be done tonight because this is the only time we'll meet before then to get this authorization completed.
Okay. All right. I'll take a motion to approve the resolution to authorize the funding for the solar projects to be installed at Lewiston and Summit Elementary Schools.
I move that we approve the resolution to authorize the funding for the solar projects to be installed at Lewiston and Summit Elementary Schools.
I second it.
Okay. Anyone have questions? All right. We'll go ahead and vote.
Okay, all the votes are in and unanimously in favor of the motion.
Okay, great. Thanks for doing that, Dale.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. A few reports then. First of all, the 2020-2021 school fee adjustment. And Mike will give us information on that.
Okay. Thank you for a couple minutes here to talk about school fees. This is something that once we set the fees in April, the law does allow us under conditions to be able to come back and meet with the board again if there needs to be a change in the school fees. And to give you a little bit of background, the last 2-3 months, our district has been going through a process to put in a new financial system that will actually work with PowerSchool, provide our patrons the ability to pay fees online, be able to use a credit card at the school. It just opens up all these avenues and options for patrons. And of course, what comes along with that is there is an assessment, 4.5% assessment made anytime a patron uses a credit card to make a payment. And I don't know about you folks, but I do not like going to a business and buy something and then just before you purchase it, they say, oh, by the way, we're adding on a convenience fee or a credit card fee. So when we met with principals and we talked through this, we want to go ahead and embed that credit card fee within the current fee schedule so that when a parent pays a fee, be it at home, at school, wherever, we won't be asking them for an additional fee because it'll already be embedded. And the way we work through this, if you pull up your the fee schedule that I have attached in board docs, we know the elementary, they don't have any fees, so it's not affecting them. If you go to section C in the middle schools, our initial proposal, when Dale looked at the total number of fees that were paid last year, that we thought that a $10 increase at the middle school and a $10 increase at the high school could cover the impact of the credit card fees. When I got into this looking just a little bit more, I took a look at the first line in section C there. It talks about the maximum fee allowable at a middle school is $150, but it does not include instrument rental or extra class projects or the rest of the things that are listed there. So I took 4.5% of $150, and that equates to $6.75. So rather than $10 at the middle school, I proposed on here changing the activity fee from $17 to $24. And then I addressed the band and orchestra, the instrument rental farther down under the section C. It was $100 and recommending that goes up to $105. And so those would be the two adjustments in the middle school area. If you go to the high school, we feel like the athletics is not going to be part of this. We feel like there's enough buffer in maximum fees allowed. The board has already approved from each of the athletic events that we would not change any of those maximums at this point. But Dale suggested when he looked at the amount of the fees that if we could raise that by $10 for the high schools, that would more than likely cover the offset the 4.5% for credit card usage by our patrons, and we will encourage that as well. But you can also read there that the maximum fee in a high school is $350. If we took 4.5% of that, that's really $15.75. But we think we can still do this for $10. But I'm also suggesting that we raise the driver's ed by $5 in each area, the driving online by $5, and the instrument rental also from $100 to $105. And of course, our main fee is the activity fee going from $40 to $50. And with that proposal, we would just let that ride for a year and then reevaluate that next spring and talk to our schools and see if they took any real big hit on credit card fees, or if what the board approves of that, if that would manage and handle that. So that's the proposal that's being made right now to the board. It's going to offer a great service to our patrons, but it comes with a cost, and our schools just can't afford to eat the credit card fees. They just don't have that wiggle room to do that. So any comments, questions at this point?
So, Mike, do we have to vote? We don't have to vote on that tonight. We can vote at our next meeting.
Yeah, by law, there has to be 2 meetings. Anytime we talk about school fees, we have to talk about it, discuss it. And we would have liked to have done it all in one meeting, but we have to wait until the next board meeting to take official action.
Mike,
Yes.
this is Terry. I appreciate that you are adding those credit card fees into the fee schedule, because I remember that when we first initiated credit card paying, most of the feedback from the parents that we heard from was that they didn't want to know about the fee. They just wanted it incorporated. So great idea.
Yeah. And we're hoping that what we're proposing here will cover the expense of the credit card fee. But we'll know after a year.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mike. All right, we'll move down to our second report, which is the school reopening report. And Tim?
Okay, so I guess I have to ask the question because I don't want to be the most unpopular guy in the room tonight of whether you want the Reader's Digest version or whether you'd like to have me give you a little bit of education on where we're at with things and where we're going so that you guys are able to answer patron questions.
All right, board, what do you want?
Hey, Tim, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah.
Yep. You've sent out the letters, and I don't know if any of you watched. I think it may have been on KSL a night or two ago. There was a pretty cranky board meeting down. I think it may have been in the Canyon School District, where parents were upset about kids, the way the kids would be meeting in classes according to the state school board's guidelines, which I know we're following here. But I'm just curious, have you, I think most all of us are probably familiar with the guidelines and read the great material you sent out to parents. Have you received any reaction from parents yet about any of this?
Yes. With 19,000 sets of parents, or give or take, that's how many students we have. We've probably taken, as directors here, maybe 6 to 8 phone calls, maybe 10 phone calls each. So 30, 40 phone calls. Mostly it's questions regarding the guidelines that as we speak with them, we were able to answer a lot of those questions and then defer some of them to, when a point when we get the plan done. So it hasn't been too bad. And then we're going to seek some feedback, which I'll cover tonight with you from the patrons. So I think it's expected. People are going to have questions and want to call and talk with someone about them.
Okay. My thought is to give us what information you think we will need to answer questions. And if you get going too long, I'll let you know.
Okay. It shouldn't be too bad. I'm pretty economical, but I do want you to understand this. So just to start off with, to give you a little bit of context, this is a report I heard last night, which I thought was interesting. It took the United States 2 months to get to 43,000 cases of the coronavirus. Yesterday, we had 53,000 cases reported in one day. So you can see the clip that we're on as far as how many new cases we have on a daily basis. And that's just to give you a little context so you understand where we're at. Last week, the state released some requirements and recommendations, which, as Chris mentioned, you all have those. They gave us a planning document that looks, well, let me share my screen here so you can see this. All right, tell me if you can all see that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just really quickly the document that goes through reopening schools with recommendations and requirements. So here at the top's requirements, here at the bottom is recommendations. In addition, we have an assurances document that we're going to have to sign and send back to the state by August 1st that says, as a school district, we assure the state that we're at least going to attend to the requirements in this planning document. We're also required by August 1st to have a district plan of how we're going to address the items in this planning requirements and recommendations document. And then in addition to that, they have provided us with a handbook to guide us in that. I kind of forgot this one. Some of you may be familiar with this document. This is the governor's document that takes the different categories of risk. So high risk, moderate risk, low risk, new normal risk, uses colors to identify those of red, orange, yellow, and green. And before in this document on page 6, it was kind of a little murky about what parts of these schools had to adhere to and what they didn't. So the governor just recently changed this. So if you look in the middle of this page, we now have a lot less verbiage with regards to public schools because it refers to the documents that I just showed you as the governing documents on what the requirements will be for public schools. Two important points that I think you should remember is when we are in red, if we get back to a red, schools will be in soft closure, distance learning only, kind of right here in the document. And we'll kind of be back in the situation we were in the spring. They did make a change to the moderate risk category that says if we're in orange, which we were for a time as well, we can meet in small groups to allow for tutoring with some of our at-risk populations, such as our ESL students, special ed students, or to do some remediation. So that's a change. And then I just wanted to point out here, just real quickly again, that they're going to refer us to this document right here, whether we're in yellow or green. And if you look at yellow and green, there's not a lot of difference between, in fact, they're exactly the same. Why they did that, I don't know, but they don't differentiate, at least in this document, between yellow and green. All right. One of the things that I wanted to show you, this is kind of the education point, is the district administration attended a meeting, and it was hosted by Sid Dixon, the state superintendent, and the Levitt Group. The Levitt Group is an organization that was started by Governor Levitt, who, if you remember, was the cabinet secretary for Health and Human Services. He started this Levitt Group, and they've been consulting the state on how to reopen schools effectively. There's just a few slides I want to show you in this document because this is kind of important for you to understand. So these are some of the key factors for transmission and spread. So you see reproduction, what the incubation periods are, how infectious the virus is and how it can spread exponentially. The idea of close contact when you're within 3 to 6 feet of someone, the idea of respiratory droplets and the importance of mitigating for that, and then the contact with surfaces or objects. You take that same thing that we just looked at, those 5 categories, right here in the middle, you've got some ways to mitigate those, which is isolating symptoms, minimizing outbreak probability, physical distancing, respiratory hygiene, and physical hygiene. In mind, you jump down here to these 7 characteristics of a situation. They do a very good job identifying that every situation we are in usually entails movement, duration for how long we're in that situation, proximity to one another, how large the group size is, respiratory output, touch, and congestion. And if you start to look at each of these situational characteristics, so this one is for movement, when movement is directed, people are at lower risk, and when it's undirected, people are at higher risk. Same thing with duration. If duration is less than 15 minutes, lower risk, more than 15 minutes, higher risk. Here's more distance, proximity, more than 6 feet, low risk, less than 6 feet, higher risk. Here's group size. That one's kind of self-explanatory. Here's respiratory output. So this is referring to, you have a student in a PE class or in a choir class, their respiratory output is going to be much increased in those environments versus if you're just in a normal kind of setting. And this one, of course, is touch. If you're on a playground playing with equipment versus you're kind of keeping your hands and feet to yourself, as we try to teach kids, two different levels of risk. And this one's congestion. So kids go to lunch, drop off and pick up at schools, more highly congested. So then they just give this example. If any of you went into the dry cleaner, and they had, signs on the floor and that kind of thing, and they direct your movement, and you're in there less than 15 minutes, and you're in a small group size, and your respiratory output is normal, and the congestion is low, you're going to be at lower risk. But in some areas, you may be, within 6 feet of the clerk. You may be touching items in the dry cleaner that, put you at a higher risk. So if you jump down to a scenario of classroom instruction, you can see that in a classroom, we'll have a lot of undirected movement, durations of longer than 15 minutes, proximities of under 6 feet. Group sizes will be larger than recommended. You might have just normal respiratory output in a regular classroom, so that's low risk, but your touch and your congestion will be high as well. So what the state's trying to do is be very principle oriented with regards to how we reopen schools, and put the principles out there and then allow us to mitigate the risk in the situations. This one's classroom instruction. Here's transitions. And they give us some basically tools to do that with in this information. So if you can imagine, one of the ways, if you can't minimize duration or proximity, maybe a mask is needed during passing time or transitions, or maybe you stagger transitions so there's not as much congestion in the hall, and those types of things. And so I think this kind of impressed us how they laid this out, just because it allows schools are different, classes are different. If we train our staff that, we can address each of these issues. I will tell you that you don't have to look at this very long to recognize that we are trying to open an environment that's probably one of the most difficult and high-risk environments to try to stop the spread of a virus as we're reopening schools. What we do have going for us is the younger population seems to be more resilient. The problem is many of those who teach those younger folks are in the older categories, or some of them are at high risks. And so we have been in consultation with a local pediatrician. That was at the advice of a national pediatricians organization. And I spent quite a bit of time educating him. He actually went through the documents that we were given by the state. He and I talked for quite a while. He's not really super concerned, the pediatricians organizations, about students, with one exception, and that would be our life skills students who have special needs and who may be in high risk categories. From a pediatric standpoint, he said those students exhibit more adult-like characteristics, plus they have the underlying health conditions. And he said, if I were to focus on one population in your schools, as far as youth, that those would be the individuals that I would focus on. And then, of course, I mentioned they don't take this stance from the pediatricians because they're not worried about the adults they are worried about the adults, but that's not their stance. That's something else that we need to worry about. One of the requirements that you may hear about in the documents is that all of the adults in a school environment, if they cannot maintain proximity from the students as they're teaching, that they wear masks or face masks, so some kind of face covering. Gary and I were out in a preschool in a life skills class this morning, and those are back in operation for at least the next 2 weeks in our schools, and all of the teachers, all the adults in those settings had masks. They were doing a lot of sanitizing to reduce risk for touch. They were doing social distancing within the classrooms. Again, a very difficult environment with little kids, but we were pretty impressed by what we saw, at least for a test phase, of the mitigating things that they were doing in the classroom to help with that. And we actually walked away with some ideas of some things that we could do to help those environments even further, with maybe getting some more disinfecting equipment into those where they have a lot of toys and that type of thing to disinfect on a more regular basis than you might get in a regular classroom. So just even looking at those principles in a life skills or a preschool environment just gave us some ideas of some things that we might do to help there. What questions do you have at this point? Now I have just one more item and I'll be done. Thoughts or questions? Our plan is to get this plan developed and have it to the board by July 21st, I believe it is, the next board meeting for your approval. We have to have it on our websites and to the state by August 1st. So go ahead. Sorry if anyone has questions.
Tim, I have a quick question. What is the response of teachers to the board's plan and your plan so far? You know, I'm sure with the number of teachers in the district that there's some that feel vulnerable. Have you gotten any response from them at all about accommodations?
Yeah, I actually had a little bit of a visit with a teacher today that has type 1 diabetes and is also pregnant and due to deliver in October. And she was very nervous about what her options were and what kind of things that she could do. I referred her to Kirk McRae for some questions about emergency leave and those types of things. We're going to have to take those on a case-by-case basis. We got some of our principals together in a meeting this week. They aren't getting overwhelmed with requests to mitigate those high-risk categories at this point, but there are staff that are going to have questions and that we're going to have to work with regard to that. And I've put together an employee survey to kind of get at some of those metrics to see if we can't kind of identify what kind of numbers we're dealing with regards to our staff. And Gary and I ran into Frank Schofield at the Logan School District today during lunch and had quite a long conversation with him. And in almost all cases, and this wasn't the case a month ago when we met with them, we were on different pages with regard to school schedules and that type of thing. But we're very close now on what we're pursuing as a school district as far as a Monday through Friday schedule, trying to mitigate for some of these risk factors.
Tim, when you were in the meeting with the state, was that yesterday or the day before? Did they talk at all about the 180 days, 990 hours? What kind of adaptations are they going to make with that?
Yeah, they had a specialist come in and visit with us regarding that very item. I don't think that was Monday's meeting. It might have been a little earlier when I can't honestly remember. They've changed that law in recent years for as far as the 990 hours to be, the difference is with the idea of educational services that you're providing for 990 hours, not necessarily seat time. Mm-hmm. But they're taking a fresh look at that to see if they can add some language in there to even give us a little bit more flexibility with the 990 hours. I don't think we'll see the 180 days switch that much in that requirement. Obviously, I think like they did last year, if we get in a tight spot, they gave us some relief on that last year during the spring and let us count 2 days off of that 180 days. So I think they'll be as flexible as possible without retreating so far that it becomes a slippery slope that anything goes, if that makes sense.
Tim, that meeting was the one earlier in the week with the superintendents.
Oh, that's right.
That's got to go before the state board. There were 4 options presented about the 180 days and 990 hours. But it's not going to change a whole lot. So we are being very careful there.
So what does that? So what does that look like if we have to go to distance learning again? Do they just count it a day, and count all the hours if a teacher assigns work to a student every day?
They're going down the road of when they went to that this year, they counted it as a day if contact was made with students and teachers. And so that's kind of how they got through it this year. They're trying to tighten that up just a little bit, but they're also going down the road where they're going to look at other ways of counting achievement so that it just isn't hours and days. And so there's kind of a mix going on right now, but it'll end up with something. But I think we can get the flexibility we need for this year if we decide that we need to provide a little more time during the week for teachers to spend preparing for those students who actually want to come to school but get sent home for 14 days. And so we have a little bit of blended learning going on. I think that's got to be worked on, and we're preparing for that also. Plus the kids who actually just want to go and have the same type of experience they had the last 2 or 3 months of last year, which is just the online education.
Great. And what about the issues that we had with a few teachers who made no contact with students? How will that affect our district and our standing with the state for the 180 and 990?
Okay, they didn't have us keep track of individual teachers, so that part didn't enter in. But we are very concerned about those teachers who went to sleep and didn't perform as we'd like them to. So we are presenting and putting a concentrated effort in to making sure that does not happen again.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you noticed in the letter the other day, we tried to drive a couple stakes in the ground so that our parents had some firm footing on what to expect in the fall. So one of those stakes was we're going to try to, for our in-person instruction, we're going to try to follow our regular school calendar starting on August 20th and ending on May 28th, and to follow that calendar as closely as we can with a Monday through Friday expectation that students will be in class. And that's what Logan is planning as well. That allows parents to do some planning and to start thinking about daycare and arranging those types of things for the fall. Now, whether we make any other adjustments to the schedule during the day, that's still to be determined, but at least we planted that stake in the ground. The other stake that we planted was we're going to provide for in-person instruction for students, and we're also going to provide for online instruction. And that's for students who choose to be home for, I'm just going to throw out a number, but that because it's a coronavirus number that we're all getting used to of 14 days of quarantine. But if you're out 14 plus days and you foresee yourself being out for a long period of time, we're working on a K through 12 online alternative for those parents where we're not trying to keep them attached to an in-person class, but we're attaching them to an online class that will be taught. And we just feel that's a better alternative, because then a teacher can concentrate on those online students and working with them individually, instead of a teacher trying to teach a class all day plus online students in a long-term setting. For students who we know are going to have situations where they come down with the COVID virus and need to be in their homes for 10 days without symptoms, or they've been exposed and need to be quarantined for 14 days, those are what we call short-term accommodations, and those will be accommodated by the classroom teachers for this class schedule that they have, or in the elementary setting, the single teacher that they have. And so those teachers will have some added work, because that'll be system-wide with all nearly 1,000 of our teachers, to say, if you've got kids at home, the absentee rates may be higher than what we've experienced. We expect that. One of your responsibilities will be to create a blended learning environment where students can keep up with the class. You know, if they're sick for 5 days, but then 5 days they feel a lot better and they can keep up with the class, we'll accommodate those kinds of needs as far as that goes. All right, I'm going to just jump in because I want you to understand, we want to get some feedback from our parents. And so we're going to be sending out a survey on Monday. And if you've got some suggestions on this, we'd be happy to listen. I've run this by several individuals. One of the things with regards to surveys is twofold. There's kind of two purposes of what we see with this survey. Number one is for us as a district to get some information from our families that will help us in planning for the fall. And number two, we think it's very important that we give our parents an opportunity to give us feedback on the reopening recommendations and requirements that the state has put out, and hope to learn from that any areas that we may not have thought of or may not be considering. So the survey is designed for that as well. We also were careful. We don't want parents to have to fill out a survey for every student that they have at home. We've done those kinds of things before. We don't get a lot of good press for that, because they're having to fill out, some of them 4, 5, 6 surveys. So we tried to design the survey so a parent needs to just complete the survey once. So just let me go through with you and just talk through the survey with you a little bit. So one of the things that we want to know is by location. So we want to be able to give our schools an idea of some of the things that their parents are thinking, and where their heads are right now as far as what their plans are. We want to educate the parents a little bit at the same time that we are trying to elicit some information. We tried to make the survey really short. This is kind of the ultimate question type thought pattern where, you know, we lower the response time, but give them an opportunity to respond to us. I could see this taking a very short time if they don't have a lot of input. And if they have a lot of input, they can take as long as they want to give us that input. So we also asked them whether they have children in their home who are in special education, English language learners, students with 504 plans, or in dual language immersion, so we can discriminate on those factors. We do ask them a question about what their thinking is and what most likely, which option that they would like to choose at this point. So would they like to choose in-person instruction or online instruction, or they're not quite sure? What we've learned with the parents that we've already conversed with is they're very leery of coming back to in-person instruction, but the longer we talk with them and tell them what we're doing, the more open they become to having their students back in our schools. So we figure that will change, and it might change both ways. As circumstances change, they may decide they want to go back to online. So I think flexibility is the key there. We want to know, one of the requirements in the law is, or the state requirements is that students are masked, wear face coverings if they're on the bus, because we can't control for a lot of the risk factors in a closed environment like that. So we want to know how many of our parents will continue to ride our buses versus transport their own students versus they'll be keeping their student at home for online instruction. We talk a little bit about, and this is a nail that we want to keep driving with our parents and our staff, that one of the most effective ways to reduce the spread of the virus is to keep children or staff home when they're sick. And we asked the parents a question about what accommodations, whether they're prepared with accommodations to keep their children at home when ill. Just a side note here, we're going to try as a school district across both our elementary and secondary settings to stop some of the practices of perfect attendance awards and that type of thing that, makes people sometimes come to school sick because they want to earn a reward or a recognition or something like that. So we're even attending to those types of things. We asked the parents their opinions on face coverings and if they would support us as a school district in that. As you well know, face coverings has been a very politicized issue. You've seen in recent days that on both sides of the aisle, a consensus or coming together on face coverings, that maybe this is something that both sides need to support. So we're encouraged by that, because that will make things much easier for us to help mitigate some things. Just FYI, we've ordered masks, face coverings for all of our parents, and we're planning on doing that for all of our students as well, so that they don't have that expense. I think the governor just accepted a shipment of 500,000 masks as well, and we expect to have those at our disposal.
Kim, you said parents. I think you meant to say staff,
yeah,
teachers.
Teachers and staff, sorry. Yeah, we didn't order parents face masks. Thank you, Sue. And then in the end of the survey, we asked 2 open-ended questions of our parents. What concerns, if any, do they have about school reopening for in-person instruction that they would like to share with us? And then the other one is, we're going to send out the requirements and recommendations again to them and just ask them if they have any feedback specifically on those requirements and recommendations that would be helpful for us to consider. I think that's a nice opportunity for them to express any concerns they have. And you get a full gamut. You get kids that may have some sensitivity to cleaning supplies, to face masks with asthma and those types of things. So I think it's an important opportunity for parents to say, hey, here are some areas that we're concerned about, and we can see kind of what the consensus around is some of those items and the volume of those types of items we get coming back from parents. Any questions or thoughts of things we might be missing? Again, we want to lower our response costs so we get as many of our parents responding to us as we can, so we get a really good representation.
I think this looks awesome, Tim. You've done a great job with it. I think this will be really good feedback from the parents.
Yeah,
I think you're on the right track, keeping it simple.
yeah.
I agree. You've all done a really great job. Appreciate it. This is a crazy time, and I do have one question, and maybe you might not know the answer to this, but when SARS was a big deal several years ago, and there were precautions taken in the classroom with hand sanitizers and cleaning, how does that illness or that disease compare with the coronavirus? virus. Are they similar anyway, or there wasn't a vaccine for SARS, was there?
No, I would say that the R factor, which we saw earlier in one of our slides, meaning the exponential rate at which this reproduces itself, and the fact that it's more consequential than SARS as far as the number of complications and deaths we're seeing from this, make it more of a pandemic than we may have seen with SARS. The sanitizer in the classrooms, we did something very similar back then, as we purchased hand sanitizer for all of our classrooms, and asked people to stay home when they were ill, but nothing to the scale of what we're mitigating at this point with this virus.
Okay. I know I was teaching during that time, and the sanitizers and the extra cleaning actually seemed to help a lot in keeping the kids healthy at school. So I appreciate all of the precautions that we're taking for this.
And there's a lot going on a lot of fronts. We've got people designing online instruction. We have nurses with hygiene and illness protocols, and we're ordering lots of protective equipment for our, doing first aid and illness protocols with our students. So there's a lot of moving parts to this whole endeavor, and there's a lot of people working and lifting, trying to make sure we're as prepared as possible for the fall.
What's happening with the choir classes?
That would be an example of high respiratory output. So we're suggesting that our principals look at alternative spaces in the school to be able to increase the proximity to one another, but still be able to accomplish those classes. So maybe moving into an auditorium that's not typically scheduled during the day versus being in a more restricted classroom size where students are very, very close together, those types of things to help mitigate those classes.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions?
I just have one comment. That is, if you haven't spent much time with those documents, the template and the other one that gives all the recommendations and requirements, there weren't very many of those recommendations that we didn't think were not doable and probably should be put into practice. So we're going to use that as our guide. And so we're asking parents to give us input, and we also would ask you to give us input as we go down this road, so that we'd have that input before we put this together. And it's a great work that the state board has done. They put a lot of time and effort into that document. We know there won't be universal agreement to all the requirements and all the recommendations, but we will meet all the requirements, and we will do as many of the recommendations as possible. One of the things that you need to understand is we just don't have the capability of doing a whole lot of social distancing. So that's not something that we're putting a lot of stock in. So we're going to have a lot of kids in small spaces, and that consequently leads you to look at the mitigation factors that we have to work with are really quite limited. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of input we receive back from parents. But we also need to receive that input from you. So please spend some time going through that document so you're familiar with it, because that's what you can use to talk to parents too, because they have that same document. And if they haven't spent time with it, it would be nice if you could say, if you would go and look at this document, it will tell you the reasons why we are doing what we're doing and thinking about doing what we're doing. So just some time spent between now and probably the end of next week would really be welcome if you could give us some input, so we don't get too far down the road with any recommendation that some of you might not feel comfortable with.
And I have a question
Should
just
we-
to follow on.
Send that to you. To Tim?
Yeah, both. Just include us both. I think that would be great. And I
Would you repeat that? My computer.
Yeah.
I
Get the input, just get it to any of us, Tim or myself, and we'll, because we meet
Okay.
often, regularly and often.
And
Okay.
I would just echo
Okay.
kind of the question that you asked us, what kind of, I think Chris asked this in the beginning, is what feedback are we getting from parents? I'd just be curious, what feedback are you getting from parents? What are you guys hearing out there?
I haven't heard much.
I'm not hearing.
Yeah. I'm
Go
kind of
ahead,
surprised,
Randall.
but I haven't heard anything in the last couple months from any parents.
Harry, did you want to make?
Let me, yeah,
Just that I have heard from a few parents, but those have no strong feelings about anything right now. They all feel like everyone's in a holding pattern. So they're all pretty neutral.
Larry?
I've only had the one contact and it was the same. They're more than anything, they're just wondering where we're at, what are we proposing, and so they're waiting to hear like everyone else.
Let me just tell you from practical experience over 40 years, you will hear from parents. It's coming. As soon as the plan gets out there, you will hear from parents. Yep.
So I have a daughter in Davis County, and they have sent out probably their tentative plan. And she is very concerned about it. So I'm kind of thinking you're absolutely right. As soon as the plan gets sent out, then people will start to comment. Okay, we ready to move on? Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. All right. Okay.
Yep.
Chris had a little bit of a discussion he wanted to bring up about graduations, and so I'm just going to turn the time over to him just to sort of lead us in some things to think about.
Thanks, Kathy. I know we're about in an hour, so I'll be extremely brief. I just want to lay down a marker for the sake of future discussion, because I don't expect us to have a long conversation about this now, but I think it's something that we definitely want to talk about in the future, and probably, we'll want to talk about again somewhat soon in terms of the venue plans for next year. We talked about graduation. We had a great discussion about it a few weeks ago as a follow-up to what happened this year at the area high schools. And, Superintendent Norton said something about how, I think it was you, Steve, said something about how, for example, Mike Monson said, cancel the Spectrum, we're never going to do it again. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for how graduation went, and it's not hard to see why. As usual, as we've seen all along during this pandemic, because we have such an outstanding district, and because the administrators and staff and teachers are so outstanding, we had the coronavirus lemon this year for graduation, and the district made lemonade and did a great job, and the response to graduations was really positive. I think the tenor of the feedback in that meeting was that, parents, it was exciting. It was new, the approach, because there had to be social distancing maintained. And so individual high schools had to be very creative and did some fun, exciting things. I think, it's clear that some of the parents also felt like maybe there was more personal attention paid to their own student, and it was a lot easier for them to attend. It was a lot more convenient. It was a lot shorter, and those things are all fantastic. But I actually left that conversation feeling kind of uneasy, and I was kind of lying there in my bed in the middle of the night thinking about it, and feeling a little bit of cognitive dissonance over the prospect of just abandoning graduation as we've known it and charging ahead into a new post-pandemic world where we do the kinds of fun, creative things that were done during this graduation or these graduations this past year. And part of it dates back to a column that I read by David Brooks in the New York Times that I just emailed to all of you about the importance of rituals in society, of which graduation is an important one. And I as a college professor, and Randall may have experienced this as well back when he was at Utah State, during his time at Utah State, working with students. I often have students approach me, and when I talk to them about graduation from the university, and I ask them if they're going to be attending, and they say no, I kind of rib them a little bit. What I often tell them is it's kind of like saying that, after you're dead, you don't want a funeral, and I tell them, look, it really doesn't matter what you think about that. I mean, there are people that you're leaving behind, and maybe they want to have one. And there are some similar principles with graduation, that it's a community event that allows people to recognize not just the student and their family, but allows the student to recognize the family. But it also gives the opportunity for the community collectively to recognize the teachers, the administrators, the staff, and each other, and each other's students, not just their own, but the collective achievement of everybody there. And I think, I was really impressed by this column by David Brooks when I read it last year when it came out, but it's something that popped into my mind after our discussion, because I think that there are probably some things that are missing from, the graduations were exciting, and I think that they were well received for good reason, because, people were very creative and they required a lot of work. But that sense of communal, that communal strength and that communal commitment, I think, is the thing that's missing when the graduation is fragmented in that way. I'll let you go ahead and read David Brooks' column, on your own, and maybe we can, revisit this after we've all had a chance to kind of go home and think about this. But he says some interesting things, and one of the things he says at the end that I think is really key here is he says he's talking about a community coming together for a ritual, and graduation is an example of that. He says it would be an occasion for people to make promises toward one another, specific ways they are going to use their gifts to solve the common challenge. Towns are built when people make promises to one another, and you could probably replace that with counties or school districts. Hold one another accountable and sacrifice together through repeated interaction toward a common end. He says, we've become pretty casual over the years. We've become reasonably present-oriented. As a result, we've shed old rituals without coming up with new ones. We've unwittingly robbed ourselves of a social architecture that marks and defines life's phases. We've robbed ourselves of opportunities to celebrate. Why do we willingly throw away chances to throw fun parties about important things? I think the thing I would emphasize is just his focus on community, that a graduation is an exercise in a community making promises to each other about what our priorities are academically. And I would say in our case, specifically in the Cache County School District, where these graduations are held at the Spectrum, that's a really neat connection, because the graduation is also aspirational. To connect it to the university in that way sets community expectations about the next step in a way that is perhaps implicit, but it still is important. So in other words, I don't want to say much more than that right now, but I guess I just wanted to say as a member of the school board that I want to be very careful before we scrap, the way that we've done things before, for the sake of, for the sake of cutting it up into smaller pieces or focusing more on the individual, because we run the risk of further fragmenting, our community in ways that we may not be able to recover. And certainly coming out of the pandemic, it's going to be really important for us to reestablish community norms that again, bring people together, where right now people are really being quite socially fragmented. It's going to be important for us to restore that kind of sense of community. I know that, it's a lot more boring for people to show up and watch a couple hundred other kids in addition to their own. But, as with other people's wedding receptions or other people's, you fill in the blank, it's important for us to recognize that, to have the community focus on the achievements of the whole rather than just the individual. So that's all I really wanted to say about it, how we want to proceed with that, because I know that superintendent said last time that the school board has some kind of input into how graduations are held. I wouldn't want to dictate that to principals. Certainly, we'd want to work with them in a partnership. But I just want to have a very careful conversation about this before we just kind of scrap everything and go forward with what's been done this past year, if that makes sense. So however we proceed with that is fine, but I just want to at least lay that marker down.
Okay, you remember the famous movie quote, "You had me at hello." So when you mentioned David Brooks, you had me. Okay, so we will have this discussion. What I would ask is we just wait until we get school started in maybe September-ish, and we bring it back then and have a good, thorough discussion, so we don't get this mixed up with the starting of school and getting all that going on, because we're going to have to get parent input on that too. I think you're absolutely right. The discussion needs to take place, and I had not seen that column by David Brooks. I read him often, and for those of you who might have been turned off by the New York Times, he's a conservative who writes for the New York Times. So let's have that discussion. And I would only ask that we wait until after school started.
Yeah, absolutely. The part of the reason I wanted to bring it up is just because I don't know if reservations have to be made for venues or if they should be made right now just to be safe and just in case.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you guys have way bigger fish to fry than next year's graduation. But I at least want to make sure I bring it up.
And principals have been told to make those reservations just in case we go back. So.
Yes, we just have the reservations in case, because they can always be canceled. But there's so many schools competing for the facility that it would be good to get our reservations in, I think.
And they have.
Everybody good with that?
Have except Skyview, and they're
okay. Okay. Can you still hear me? My computer is just weird here. I'm not sure that everybody can hear. Can you? Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and move on. Couple of things just for the board president report. I did talk with Carolyn, who called Logan to see if they would go ahead and set up the legislative luncheon, because our legislators said that they would like to have that information by July, so that they could plan it on their calendars. I don't know exactly how that's all going to pan out now with losing a couple of our great legislators. But for right now, it is scheduled for October 6th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So go ahead and put that on your calendars. And we'll just kind of move towards that direction and see what Logan comes up with and how they want to handle it. We are planning on doing our August 6th and 20th board meetings and the retreat on the, think there's any retreat? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Hello?
Kathy, you're cutting out, so we didn't hear what
Sorry,
you're
couldn't hear you. Can you hear me?
Kathy? You're cutting out, so we can't hear you.
Kathy, we can hear you dialing, so I think we can probably hear you talking if you want to try again.
Oh, thank you. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So we'll just plan on August the 20th board meetings, the retreat on the 13th. And my question was, do you think there's any chance we can do the retreat in person?
I think there's always a chance. But I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I've got all the superintendents supposed to be coming to our district on the 30th and 31st of this month. And we're thinking right now they're going to come in person, but I think you just have to kind of play it by ear and wait and see. But I think we could plan on having it in person. We've certainly got spaces big enough we could social distance. So, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm thinking on the retreat is here are the topics that we'll talk about. We'll go ahead and with Jeff's help set our board goals. We'll work our strategic plan. Maybe it would be to get district that's important to know any of her as part of talk about get a little more community element our patron. So that's kind of my mind. If anybody's thinking anything different, just email me and we'll kind of just move and see what happens.
Okay, Kathy, I would suggest you send those ideas out
All right.
in written form because you were cutting in and out again. So that's okay.
Steve, we'll go ahead with you.
I'm done.
All right.
Well, Tim carried everything that he's carrying the main buckets, and we're just putting water in them for him. And we'll get where we need to get, but it's a busy time. That's period. Yeah. But we'll get there.
Thank you so much to the board and also so much to our district people. I know that this is a crazy time, and however we can help you, just let us know. Does anyone have anything else? We'll go ahead and adjourn then.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
Good night.